I'm Amanda Isaac, Associate Curator at George Washington's Mount Vernon, and we are privileged to have with us today Dora Petherbridge, Assistant Curator of U.S. and Commonwealth Collections at the National Library of Scotland. And she is here with us today with an original book from George Washington's library, The Official Letters to the Honorable American Congress. Dora, tell us about this remarkable book.
Well, this particular copy of Official Letters is entirely unique because it was owned by George Washington and also sent to him by the editor of the volumes, a man called John Carey. It's the first edition, published in 1795 in London. And you can see on the title page of the first volume George Washington's signature, so we know that it...
Right there at the top, but it's been clipped off a little bit by the book binder.
Yeah. And the books were sent by the editor over on a ship from London, and this copy was intended for Washington to see how it had been compiled.
Dora, what are these official letters that Washington's writing here?
They date from the first 4 years of the War of Independence. The first letter is dated the 24th of June, 1775, so about just over a week after Washington was elected Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Forces. And they run up to the end of 1778. They're Washington's letters, but also intercepted letters from British officers, reports, documents, letters from commanders-in-chief from the forces, and other kind of what the editor calls sundry documents that Washington was dealing with throughout the course of the conflict.
And how did Carey obtain access to these letters? Do you have to get special permission? Were there any that were held back?
Yes, I think it was quite difficult initially to get permission to look at the documents because there were some of them that were secret. So he had to write to Thomas Jefferson and the office of the Secretary of State where all the papers were and request permission to transcribe them, to go through them, read them, make notes from them, collate them and organise them. And he was granted permission in 1792, which was 3 years before the date of publication. And so he went to Philadelphia and worked in the office and looked at the papers, but he wasn't allowed to see everything. He had to request particular parts of the collection of correspondence because some of it was still under wraps.
Still classified.
Yes.
And of course, back then he was copying it all by hand. In terms of accuracy, how did he ensure that?
I think it was quite difficult because he says, we've got notes from him, he says that when he arrived, all the files were in a confusion, that nothing was quite in order. So he decided to start with what he called the principal letters, the ones that Washington had written himself, and then working from those letters, ordered all the other documents around that and kind of matched up things that didn't have dates or perhaps names attached to them. So I think it was a large task and something that he found quite daunting and quite difficult. And he didn't quite get to the end of it, which is why the correspondence stops in 1778 in the second volume and doesn't go beyond. But we know that he had plans were these volumes to be well received to continue and publish more afterwards.
And this volume is so unique because it's one of the volumes he presents to George Washington.
Yes.
And he actually adds his own notes, his editorial notes to it. What can you tell us about those?
Well, he sent 2 copies to Washington, a pristine copy with no notes, and then this one, which was acting like a justification for all of his editorial methods. So throughout the volume there are little annotations down the margin where he says that he's omitted a passage here, or he couldn't maybe work out what something said, so he's filled in the blanks. He tells Washington exactly how he approached the task, and then at the end of the second volume he writes longer notes to Washington talking about obstacles and omissions, so the obstacles he experienced in collating the letters, and then the omissions he had to make from the books themselves.
Dora, what happens to this in the later part of the 19th century?
So towards the end of the 19th century, it becomes available for sale, and it's acquired by Bishop Fletcher Hurst, who is the Chancellor at the American University in Washington, and it enters his private collection. And when the bishop dies in 1904, it's then bought by another gentleman collector, William A. Reed, and then when he dies, it becomes available for sale again. And it's in about 1936 when it's again auctioned off, and the renowned bookseller and collector Abraham Rosenbach of Philadelphia
Yes.
knows that it's coming up for sale. And he has a client, a Scotsman called Hugh Sharp, and he writes to Hugh Sharp and he says, "We've got these Washington volumes, they're going to be sold, do you want to put in a bid?" And Hugh Sharp, he jumps at the chance because he's a bibliophile, he loves American history, and he cables a bid to Rosenbach and he says he'll pay up to $11,000 for them. Rosenbach gets them for $9,800 and writes back and says, "Congratulations, you've got the books at a good price." And then they make their first transatlantic journey since 1795 back over to Scotland, and they enter the library of Hugh Sharp, and he has them only for about 2 years before he dies quite young in a train crash. And after his death, his family donate the entire collection, including official letters, to the National Library of Scotland. And it was certainly seen at the time as a very generous donation, particularly because of these unique volumes, which had been described as a historical monument of the highest value. So they then became preserved by the National Library, and we treasure them as
In a way, it's really reached the intended audience that Carrie had from the beginning, to reach the British.
yes.
Thank you, Dora, and the National Library of Scotland and the people of Scotland for sharing with us this incredibly rare volume. It's so important to our understanding of Washington, to who he was, his integrity and virtue, and we really appreciate the chance to be able to see it in person and learn from it.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure to bring the books back to their original home. Thank you.